The Thursday, January 24, 2019 regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission will now come to order. Could we please have the roll call?
Commissioner Gomez?
Here.
Commissioner Gooding?
Here.
Commissioner Mackin?
Here.
Commissioner Patel?
Here.
Commissioner Sayasan?
Here. All commissioners are present. Could I have a motion for adoption of the agenda?
I make a motion that we adopt the agenda.
And a second, please?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Okay. Consent calendar. Is there anyone who would like to remove items from tonight's consent calendar? We have two items. They're draft action minutes, December 13 and January 10. Seeing none, could I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
I make a motion that we adopt the consent calendar.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Moving on. Oral communications. Is there anyone here who would like to address the commission on any item that is not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. Written communications, we have none. New business, we have tonight a public hearing. This is on 111 South Hill Drive. It's in Crocker Park. It's use permit UP-9-18. Use permit to establish 4,000 square foot delivery-only retail cannabis business within an existing 15,885 square foot office warehouse building. Kent Kroll applicant. Could we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the requested permit tonight is for a use permit for a cannabis retail delivery business located at 111 South Hill Drive. You'll recall just last month, a use permit was approved at this same address. That was for a retail delivery, distribution, and manufacturing company. That company holds a master lease for that whole building, so the applicant tonight is occupying one of those subleasable areas. So at this point, we should be fairly familiar with this property at 111 South Hill, surrounded by existing operating manufacturing, distributors, freight forwarding, food production, as well as office uses. As well as the site plan here. Again, 101 South Hill is now occupied by Kaliva, cannabis retail delivery, manufacturing, and distribution business. And this would be the back building at 111 South Hill Drive. The business that received a use permit last month is not currently operational yet. So at this point, Kaliva is the only cannabis business operating in town. So the site plan here is showing there's 35 spaces that are available to 111 South Hill in their lease agreement with the property owner. Truck access for distribution deliveries. Then product loading for this particular applicant would occur at their west entry to the building, not via the loading dock, which would be used by the distribution business. So the applicant submitted an operations plan that details their operations. So they've identified or estimated having 40 delivery drivers working throughout a 14-hour workday and staggered in shifts to ensure that when they do need to come to the site to either get materials or drop off money, whatever may be, that they're not coming more than twice to the site. And I'm sure they can address that in a little bit more detail in their presentation to you. They also submitted an odor management plan as part of their application that was attached to your operations plan to detail the exterior and interior air filtration systems that will be installed to make sure there is no off-site noticeable odor from the cannabis products. And then in terms of security, as all of their businesses you've seen, they have worked with the police department to create a security plan that, the security for access primarily into the building. So the police department has worked with them. They will be required to install some features prior to occupying or starting their businesses, and that will be subject to the police department's review and inspection. So you're familiar with the use permit findings. I won't go too far into them here, but typically when we're looking at these cannabis businesses in Crocker, we're wanting to make sure their operations plan is addressing all the potential issues with security, site access, parking, ensuring that the actual operation of the use is not going to become a nuisance or hazard to surrounding properties. So as addressed in detail in the staff report, the applicant's proposal does comply with the use permit findings for approval, complies with the performance standards, not only in the Crocker Park District, but specific to cannabis businesses anywhere in the city. So I'll keep it brief. We are recommending approval of the use permit subject to the conditions and findings contained in the resolution attached to your report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Julia. Commissioner Patel, would you like to start? Commissioner Gooding?
My only question is about parking, and I know that they seem to be well within the vehicles per 1,000 square feet thing, but the 40 vehicles that are coming in and out, my vague recollection is that the other two subtenants here are also having, two-digit numbers of vehicles coming in and out. Is there any sort of total math on how many vehicles are going to be coming in and out of that one spot as far as any burden on street parking is concerned?
Well, there currently, I think there's only street parking passed by, right, at this point?
Yeah, there isn't any is why I'm asking.
Right, exactly, but I think it's been used as a de facto street parking. I think the applicants are prepared to talk about their parking management strategy, and I think their operations, like how long drivers are actually going to be parked, probably has a lot to do with making sure there's always spots available. But yeah, we could certainly look at, if you wanted a calculation, I could look back at the prior use permit and give you some numbers. But I think operationally, they're aware of the parking constraints that are available to them, and that's how they're going to manage their drivers, essentially. Because they don't want their drivers not able to quickly do their job and get what they need to do.
Just parenthetically, when I was, I think for the first permit application, I went out there and looked, and it looked like there's lots of sort of overflow parking or vehicles being parked there that were about the neighbors, which kind of needs to be addressed at some point of, could get back in your own parking lot sort of thing. But that's kind of their problem.
The property owner of the subject property also owns the property next door. So, the details of that arrangement, it might just be the property owner is saying, he has a more liberal view of sharing,
Right.
Sharing parking between his two properties.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't burden these tenants with
Right.
having, the parking all taken up, it's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good point, thank you. Commissioner Saison?
No questions.
Commissioner Gooding? Not Gooding, Gomez, sorry.
No.
No. Okay, I have one question, just a clarification. In the staff report on G1.3, top of the page, location of business activities. Standard requires that all aspects of the business, with the exception of incidental loading and offloading. Could you just elaborate what is meant by incidental loading and offloading?
What that's meant is any product that's coming in or coming out relative to either being taken away by a delivery driver or coming in off a truck to be taken inside. That can all happen outside of a building. That's literally incidental to the use. What that prohibits is you can't have pallets just, on the pavement for 24 hours after being offloaded, or, it's that performance standard is relative to the fact that we don't allow things to be stored outside in Crocker.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Okay, at this time, we'll open the public hearing, and I see the applicant is here. If you would like to step forward, please identify yourself for us. Tell us a little bit about your project.
Sure. Hello, Commissioners. Thank you for having us. My name is Anna Ree Grabstein, and I'm the Chief Compliance Officer for NorCal Cannabis. And with me today is Kent Kroll, who is our project owner inside of our company and is the head of development, so has been overseeing this whole process. And I'm going to give a presentation today to hopefully answer some questions. Read this one? Yep. Okay, great. You guys have this on your screens, I assume?
Yes.
The project is being sponsored by NCC Brisbane LLC, but NCC Brisbane LLC is a wholly owned subsidiary of Osiris Ventures, which does business as NorCal Cannabis Company, and that's who we work for and who we're representing today. NorCal Cannabis was founded in 2015, and we are a vertically integrated cannabis company with cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and non-storefront retail operations in San Francisco and Santa Rosa that are currently operational. Right now we have about 300 full-time employees across the company operating in those various activities that I just listed. And so far we have done over 100,000 direct-to-consumer deliveries of cannabis, and we have completed them with not one serious incident. We have long-standing collaborative relationships with the local regulators in all areas that we operate in, and that's something that really matters to us in every jurisdiction. So we really look forward to a long relationship with you all here in Brisbane. Today we are applying for a non-storefront retail license to deliver cannabis direct to retail, to consumers direct from our facility in Crocker. Our mission as a company is to create an ecosystem that honors the cannabis plant, respects the farmer, solidifies the supply chain, empowers the consumer, and creates opportunities for all people to be uplifted. In our workplaces, we have very specific workplace values that we work very diligently with our managers and with our staff to encourage a certain type of culture that we're trying to create in our company. We respect all people and value diversity. We prioritize safety and compliance over profit. We are reliable, disciplined, and trustworthy. We are accountable to our fellow teammates in the company, and we foster internal opportunities for growth within our workforce. And we have long-standing track record of people starting as drivers and being promoted internally. One thing, people don't think about driving as a very glamorous job, and it actually is a really great way for us to get to know people and their skills to be considered for more career path jobs, and it's been something that has been really wonderful for us to develop. And this is just a picture of our company at our picnic over the summer. So this is the site. As the planner mentioned, we have subleased 4,500 square feet from MGIC, who received their use permit in December. We have maximized opportunities to collaborate with them to ensure additional safety and better design than we could have done as two individual companies, so it's been a really solid collaboration every step of the way. These things include things like odor mitigation and security detection infrastructure that we'll be installing. Additionally, our team has worked with planning and police departments on site and security plan. And specifically, we have, of the 35 parking spots, we have 17 of them, and we'll go into that a little bit more right on this slide. So our delivery operations will be designed based on what your code allows, which is 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And all of our drivers will be over 21 in compliance with California and Brisbane regulations. At our facility, we expect to have 7 non-drivers working at a time, and then the roughly 40 drivers who will work each day, and that's really at maximum capacity for us. We don't expect that out of the gate at all we will have that many drivers. But the way that we schedule drivers will allow for no problem that we anticipate with parking, because the way that it works is that the drivers will each require, and at the very bottom of the slide is kind of some math, that the drivers will require 2 daily trips to the facility, which then totals with 40 drivers, 80 total trips over 14 hours, which comes to 5.7 visits to the facility by hours each. By 5.7 visits to the facility by drivers per hour. So you can think of that as 1 visit every 10 minutes. And that means that we have plenty of parking spots with 17. In terms of security, we have a ex-Apple and Uber security professional on our team who has been working hand in hand with our designers to create a security system that we feel really confident will more than satisfy all requirements, and those things include 24/7 video surveillance, third-party off-site, third-party on-site security. I'm sorry, we have an error on our slide. third-party on-site security and off-site monitoring, comprehensive alarm system, physical barriers, and the entire premise is limited access with multiple step authentication to get inside. Additionally, there is GPS tracking and inventory systems that comply with the track and trace protocols. All of our employees receive background checks before they're hired and would start their first day of work. We have a secure man trap at the single point of entry. And additionally, we've collaborated with MGIC, our landlord, on all of these things. People often have questions about cash management, so here's just a little bit of information on that, is that we actually don't deal with as much cash as people think. We have credit card processing, and the far majority of our transactions do occur with electronic payment of some kind ahead of time. But if we are doing cash transactions, which we do allow, it is held for a minimum. There's minimal cash that's held on site, and it's held in secure safes, which are also monitored under our security that we just outlined. And additionally, the state has put out very specific rules about maximum amount and value of product that a delivery driver can carry at any time, and that is $5,000 of cash or cannabis in a delivery vehicle. So never at any time would the value or the cash that a driver was carrying exceed that. And we will have on-site security who will help monitor and manage the cash with our team. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Gooding?
I'm fine, thank you.
No? Commissioner Patel?
What do you do with your trucks between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m.?
So we do not own the vehicles. The drivers drive their own personal vehicles, so we don't have any trucks.
Got it.
Commissioner Gomez?
Yeah, that's similar. I was thinking more the delivery trucks, and I apologize if I missed that key point, because you had mentioned in the staff report that not able to store any physical goods outside in Crocker Park, but the delivery trucks themselves have got those are like a van, right, or some sort of like secured vehicle. Are those parked on site, or are those kind of coming and going?
So just to clarify, so different than our neighbors on the property, we are only a direct-to-consumer retail. So we don't have wholesale distribution.
Okay.
So as a result, we don't have vans and trucks.
Okay.
The
So that
only
was a
vans or
thought.
trucks that would be coming to our facility would be to deliver product that we're purchasing direct to our inventory, and they'll just come drop off their product and leave.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was just trying to understand the model of getting trucks in and out, just from a pure curious about the volume of traffic that's going to be related to all the activity, because I know the businesses are still just kind of getting things up and running, so it's more of just a curiosity down the line.
From our experience at our San Francisco delivery operations, we are very cognizant of when we schedule our incoming deliveries, and the cannabis supply chain is complicated, and the way that the supply chain has been organized is with distributors, and so we have been luckily able, we don't work with a ton of different vendors, we work with a small set of just a couple distributors that are able to bring us our deliveries all at once, just a couple times a week. We don't have vendors dropping off product all day long by any means.
Okay,
Try to be as efficient as possible.
excellent. Thank you. Yeah.
Commissioner Syson?
No questions.
I'm just curious, based on your experience, you mentioned San Francisco, what are the peak hours with which your delivery drivers seem to get the most calls to deliver? Or
Sure.
are they paced? I mean, how do you handle that? I'm kind of segueing off your question and your question about traffic. And obviously, you said you wouldn't start with 40 vehicles, but we wish you the best with your
Yes,
business. So we'd
absolutely.
like to
Thank
see
you.
you doing 40 vehicles. But are there peak hours based on your experience where the customers anticipate receiving an order And does that vary weekend, weekday? Just give us some idea.
We are the most busy on the weekends and holidays, and there's definitely peak days throughout the year that are generally holidays and weekends. And then we tend to be slow at the early part of the day, and then orders really start coming in 11 to noon. And then what we do is we pace them. So it's different than pizza delivery in that people are really expecting to get their pizza hot. We give people a time that they expect their delivery, and then we're able to sometimes they get it in 15 minutes and sometimes they get it in 2 hours. It will just depend on what makes the most sense for our drivers so that they can be routed in an efficient way, because we are very cognizant of vehicle miles traveled as well. So we'll try to make sure that people are going and getting the deliveries in a certain neighborhood all at once. And so that might mean that, they wait for a few deliveries in a certain area before they head there. So you're right that there is fluctuation. So that estimate of 5.7 trips into the depot every hour, some hours it might be 8 trips, and some hours it might only be 4, depending. But we feel that fluctuation is something that we can easily control with expectations around delivery time that a customer will expect their order.
And so how do you avoid queuing up, say you had 40 vehicles? How do you avoid queuing up with a line of taxis at the airport waiting to actually get the merchandise to go deliver it? How do you accomplish that?
So we have secure cases of product that we put our most popular products in, and those are placed securely in the vehicles. And so the drivers come and they pick up that case of inventory, and then they're able to leave and go out into the areas where we expect that the delivery will take place, so that they're actually closer to the customer for when the order comes in.
Okay, but say that you had 20 drivers finished and came back. How would you avoid having 20 lined up saying, well, I'm just sitting here now waiting for my next batch?
Well, so one of our 7 staff that are on site inside the building is our fleet manager. And so they're in constant communication with the drivers at all times. And so that's what their job is to control traffic. And so they know who's coming and when they're going, and they would make sure that there was never more people than we were able to handle in a secure and compliant way based on the site's needs and our staff and security's ability to handle people as they come in.
Okay, very good. Anyone else?
I
Follow
just
up?
have a quick question. You mentioned that there were no serious incidents. Have there been non-serious incidents?
There was one non-serious incident where there was someone who was basically approached to get robbed, and with a very small order, and the order was given to the robber, and nobody got hurt, and we did all of the reporting that was necessary, but we don't consider it to be serious at all because there was absolutely no injuries.
Okay.
Yeah. So out of 100,000, we feel that it was it's amazing, honestly, and great.
So for smart or, wily people hanging out for these folks, is there any sort of marking or any sort of telltale indication of what your drivers are doing out there in the delivery point?
Zero. So our drivers, don't wear hats or T-shirts that identify themselves, and they all drive their own personal cars. There's not stickers like on an Uber or a Lyft. It's just a personal vehicle, and what we found is that is the most secure way for our drivers to get around.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I do have one little kind of,
Please,
and
go
this
ahead.
goes into like cybersecurity, and so I might go down a rabbit hole that I'm not
I don't
really
know if I can
familiar
answer, but I'll try.
No. And I have no idea. Is there like an Amazon type platform where people are ordering, or do you have your own proprietary? How are people ordering this
Sure.
stuff, and is that hackable to where you would know where drivers would be going? That's where my kind of
Interesting.
cybersecurity question is, and
Yeah.
it's just a I know maybe
Sure.
you've been asked this by other people.
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the question in 2 parts. The first question, in terms of how orders get placed, we do use the technology platform. There's a number of different platforms out there,
Okay.
and those platforms one of the things that's useful to companies like us is that they are all designed to integrate with the California track and trace system, which requires a very specific way that we report our inventory into the state to make sure that there isn't any black market diversion. And so there is a platform that we've been using in San Francisco. We're actually looking at a different platform, and we're kind of testing out different ones. There's a bunch of popular ones out there. They are things like there's a platform called Meadow, there's one called Ease, there's one called Trees, there's probably 25 of them. You need a platform to run a complex business like this, and for a business like ours, we aren't software developers, but these software tools give us the ability to put a menu online and make it so that customers can have an interface where they can choose what they want, just like a regular online shopping experience that you guys are familiar with. In terms of hacking, this is where it's difficult for me to answer. What I want to say is absolutely not. Okay. They're all secure. I don't feel confident answering that question. All right. I will say that we, take security very seriously, and we believe that the companies that we work with also do. And I also know that in our world, it doesn't seem like anything is secure anymore, but we do our best.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. It was just, you hear about these, major hacking enterprises, and so it's something that kind of, as we look towards community and driver safety and your business doing really well, it's something that just kind of came to mind at the tail end of this discussion.
I think that the fact that the state has set a very specific value limit on the amount of inventory or cash that a driver is able to hold at once is really the best security, because anyone who's going to hack that system knows that that person is only going to have $5,000, and that's, or less. I mean, that's the maximum, and that's really not worth it, I don't think, for what could come of that situation. For someone that's able to hack a system, they probably are looking for a lot more than $5,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Saison?
Just a little follow-up. So you do cash transactions. Do you have a maximum limit for each transaction, like $75 or $100? Or?
We don't, no.
So someone could conceivably order $1,000 worth of products, and
they could. Our average transaction size is $87, and there is limit that the state puts on about the amount of cannabis that a person can purchase in a day, but that amount probably is over $1,000. But we've processed many thousands of orders, and the average transaction is $87.
Okay.
Just a curiosity, your security personnel, are they employees or are they a contract security agency?
Our security guards are contract security guards, and everyone else on site is employees. We do have, NorCal Cannabis has an employee who oversees our security and guides our security strategy and chooses and manages our security contractors.
Okay, very good, thank you. And anyone else?
One more quick one, and if it's proprietary, that's okay, but out of curiosity, as far as the industry standards are developing, who is handling your credit transactions these days?
It changes. Yeah, it's the moving target.
Initially, it was just credit unions, as far as I knew, but are there...
There's a number of credit card processors out there.
Are there?
Yeah, but yeah, I don't want to say if
that's fine.
It's not required. Banking is complicated in this industry.
Fair enough.
Anyone else? No? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And would your associate like to?
I think she said it.
Oh.
My name is Ken Kroll. You might have seen it on the staff report, but no, I'm here. I'm happily here to answer any questions you guys might have. I worked with Mario Gomez at the police department on security plan, and along with Julia in developing the plan that you guys have seen. So I think for a delivery only operation, it's very simple. But I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Anyone else? I think we're done.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, could we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Go ahead.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Okay, discussion, commissioners.
I have nothing.
Nothing further, thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to accept use permit UP-9-18.
I move to approve use permit UP-9-18.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Congratulations. Welcome to Brisbane. Thank you. Good luck. Let's see 40 drivers. All right, moving along. Tonight we have a study session. This is inclusionary housing and density bonus ordinance update. Staff, it's all yours.
All right, so this technology switch. Okay. All right, so we are continuing our discussion of the inclusionary housing and density bonus ordinance update. So the memo kind of laid out what we've done so far. So you guys have talked about this. I think this is the 5th meeting where we've discussed this update. And just to kind of focus our conversation tonight, we have our purpose here. Really, we have drafted some revisions to the inclusionary requirements and density bonus ordinance, and we attached those to the memo that you guys got last week. And really what we're looking for tonight is some feedback on that language. If we need to make adjustments, if we need to go a completely different direction, that's what we're really looking for tonight. So again, to kind of remind us all why we're here, the recent passage of Assembly Bill 1505 in 2017 did require us to include at least one by right alternative to building inclusionary units for rental housing in our inclusionary ordinance. That was the mandate there. The bill also said that any ordinance requiring more than 15% of a housing development be affordable to low-income households for a rental development would require scrutiny by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And as we've discussed, the way our inclusionary ordinance is currently structured as kind of the sliding scale, there were instances where the inclusionary requirement was over 15%. So you all had given us direction a couple meetings ago that going with a 15% straight requirement for rental housing seemed to make sense, just so that we could move forward with our update without requiring HCD's extra scrutiny. Not that they won't be looking at it, but. And then we also got some direction on some other tweaks to our inclusionary requirements, and we'll go into those in a little bit more detail. And then for the density bonus revisions, again, our housing element directed us to update our density bonus ordinance to give some more incentives to developers, whether it be to small projects that aren't otherwise eligible for a state density bonus, or to give extra incentives if they're providing deeper levels of affordability, etc. So those are our mandates. Those are why we are doing this. Okay, so let's start with inclusionary. And before we go on too much further, are there any questions? We're all clear on why we're here, what we've done, what we're about to do. Okay. Okay, so the inclusionary requirements. This is attachment 1 in your memo. So I'm going to kind of go through piece by piece that we've made a couple different changes that we're asking you guys to give feedback on. So the first is, again, that revising our requirement for rental housing developments to a straight percentage, 15%. The more significant part of this is that whereas previously the inclusionary ordinance was 15% affordable split between low and moderate income households, we are now recommending that we actually target very low income households. And the memo outlines a couple main reasons for that. The first being that financing opportunities for housing developments are really geared towards projects including 50 to 60% AMI in terms of affordability, which is in that very low income range. So there's a greater pool of funding for projects that include that specific type of housing. And the other part of that also being that, you know, we do have our regional housing needs allocation that we get every housing element cycle that breaks down certain amounts of units for each income category that have to be built. And we have, it's such a deep level of affordability that it is challenging to get that level of affordability without a requirement like this. Whereas low and moderate, you know, there's, you know, for example, our existing development at 1 San Bruno does have inclusionary units in it. Those are affordable to low and moderate income households, not the deeper, very low income household. We haven't had a ton of projects come through that's applied to. Yes.
Just for a point of reference, could you tell us how many units in 1 San Bruno are inclusionary?
There's
So we have
two.
a visual.
Yes, there were 2 units. So those are the kind of 2 big parts of what we're proposing in terms of revising our requirements for rental. Is 1, make it the 15% straight percentage, and 2, gear that towards the very low income household income category. So I'd like maybe some feedback.
Sure. I have a quick question, just procedurally. Do you want us to interrupt you while you're going
Yeah.
through the presentation, or do you want us to just wait?
No, this is, honestly, I think as things come to mind, it's probably better to just bring them up. So absolutely, if you want to.
I know we did talk about the 15%, but can you just review with me what type of procedure would be required if we did more than 15%?
Sure. Which other cities have done. So basically what the bill requires, or now state law requires, is any requirement that exceeds 15% could be subject to HCD review, analysis. They would like to see an economic study basically justifying that higher percentage, showing that it's not actually chilling development or making it less attractive for developers to build housing. So however they landed at that kind of 15% threshold, I'm not quite sure what went on in their back room, but anything over that, they're just scrutinizing a lot more.
How would one even do that?
Do an economic study?
Yeah, like that this percentage is the percentage that is still viable for someone to develop a piece of property and still higher than the 15%.
We've done that. So the Nexus study that we've kind of danced around, talked about, is that type of analysis. So you look at development costs, you look at prototypical developments, what type of development might we expect to see. You take into hard cost of construction, soft costs, and you literally, that's what the economists do. They say, is this going to make a project infeasible if they have to provide this percent of subsidized or whatever units?
So based on your experience with this, is 15% the appropriate percentage, or is it something higher than that? Based on just what you would go off of, I'm not committing you to it, I'm just saying based on your experience.
Well, I think it's common if we look at the countywide data that we provided to you guys in that table, you're usually seeing 15 to 20.
Right.
So, yeah, I think but some cities go as low as a 10% requirement.
Right. I saw that the list with the different cities
Yeah.
and the different charts.
So you'll see a range between 10 and 20% in any city. Bigger cities, I think like Redwood City, when they recently updated theirs, they have a higher 20% requirement. They do have an economic study just justifying that. Or a city like San Francisco, John.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think part of the equation in Brisbane is we're talking about small projects. So the difference between 15 and 20 may or may not actually add up to additional units at the end of the day. It's a rounding one way or the other. So the question is, do we do an economic study and go through that cost for what gain of 5% of a very small increment of units that are being created? And that's sort of a cost benefit sort of aspect for the city as well.
Would these sections be applicable to the Baylands?
Anything in the ordinance would be a floor for the Baylands. I think it's subject to separate negotiation because there's going to be a development agreement. And if one of the community benefits that people want to see on the Baylands is a deeper and more robust affordability component that can be negotiated as part of that development.
So would it benefit us to consider, I mean, if there's a floor, would it benefit us to consider that right now, whether we should be looking at 15, 20, if there's going to be major housing developments out there, wouldn't it make sense that we would look at maybe doing deep, like the lower cost housing, and as well as moderate as well as low, and making, I mean, I'm just asking, like, if that's going to be something that's going to be a floor, is that something we should be considered or worried about right now?
I guess I think that's going to have its own, because again, the scale of that is so out of scale from what the typical application will be in projects in Brisbane. You don't see that kind of scale issue. I'm not seeing that this particular ordinance is going to make or break that negotiation. It's going to be a whole separate sort of issue and process. So I don't know that, again, for the effort of raising the floor incrementally, I suspect whatever happens at the Baylands is going to go well above that floor, even if you raise it incrementally. So what have we gained? I think that negotiation will have to happen, and I suspect there'll be deeper, more extensive requirements and a broader range of affordability, because again, they're probably mixed product too. They have probably for sale, I would assume, with that kind of amount of development. You'd have for sale and rental, and again, that's, and Julia emphasized that, but that's a difference between what she's talking about for rental versus for sale, which does have a broader mix of there's more flexibility of moderate and low. So I think you're going to have a better suite and an opportunity within that larger development to sort of accommodate multiple ranges of income based on the kind of products that are being developed out there.
And can I also, the last section of this chapter, which I'm sorry I don't have up on the screen, we do have a section in our inclusionary housing and density bonus chapter that says any project that's subject to the inclusionary requirements can request a modification or adjustment of those requirements, and that would include different income targeting or maybe different percentages of. So I'm not to at all really talk about specifically what the Baylands is, but just in general to emphasize that these requirements in special circumstances, a developer could request some modifications for council approval if they feel like it doesn't fit their product type, or if the council feels actually maybe it is more beneficial to the community to get low and moderate versus very low. So there's flexibility. It would have to be requested and have to be studied, but the ordinance does allow for it to be adjusted if it's appropriate. Does that help?
Is it requested? So it would have to be requested by the developer, or can the city force the developer?
Just pull up the community code and we can look at it.
I didn't see that section. I'm sorry.
It's in the existing ordinance. Which
Oh,
is
sorry.
probably why I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, so an applicant would have to request it as this wording goes, but it says the inclusionary housing requirements may be waived, adjusted, or reduced if the applicant can show, a variety of things they have to show. And then the council has certain findings that they would have to make in order to approve it.
Right.
So it's not a,
Right.
let's talk about it at the very beginning. It's really if this requirement is particularly burdensome based on the type of project or whatever the circumstances might be, it would have to be a request from the developer. So the idea being that this should be right for most projects, but recognizing it might not be right for every single project. Maybe there is that one project where an adjustment would be warranted.
So what I'm understanding though is if there's a huge development, let's say Baylands, or let's say we somehow get the quarry at some other point, because those are such large developments, these basic inclusionary rules wouldn't apply to those developments. There would have to be a separate set of inclusionary rules that would be created for each of those developments.
I think what we're saying is that, and again, the world changes and direction changes and policy changes, but in the foreseeable future, the issue of affordable housing is an important community issue, and I would expect that, again, given sort of the importance of that issue, that it is going to rise to the top of being prospective community benefits or an importance in the value of a project that has a large residential component. And there's going to be an expectation driven by the city council as to how affordability can be, maximized, not the minimum that's being required, but how can you optimize and maximize and leverage that kind of scale of development to really do something meaningful, not cropping one unit out of 6 in a onesie twosie kind of,
Yeah.
which is what we get downtown. But I mean, obviously policy priorities change over time, but I would, practically speaking, I can't see any of the large sites that could be open for residential development in the prospective future in Brisbane not having to deal with affordability in a more meaningful way than the bare bones minimum here.
Can I just pop in there? And one thing just came to mind, I'll just share with you. Having followed all the unfolding of Parkside Plan as a specific plan, there was a large emphasis on the part of the council of smaller units to accommodate, at least in part of it, to accommodate affordability. So there are ways, I think what John's trying to say is when you have a bigger project, there's ways that the council and the public can say, well, we want a better mixture. So the guidelines in this draft are for most projects, but larger projects, changing significant character of the city, there's usually a lot more input and negotiations that take place between the public, the developer, the council.
Right, that's my question. Is there a conflict? So if we wanted to make more in the Baylands besides 15%, then we can.
Sure.
Okay, that was
Good.
just, I don't want there to be a conflict, like, oh, we're stuck to 15% now. Okay. Sorry. Here we go.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, the next piece that we want to highlight is we're proposing making the base threshold for the inclusionary requirements to be the same as for a density bonus. So for a 5-unit project or more. Currently it is for a 6-unit project or more. So there's a couple of reasons for this. I mean, one, I think it's for implementation purposes. It's just odd to have one threshold applying and then a different one applying to any one housing development. You could have a 5-unit project that's applying for a density bonus under state law and is providing the extra units anyway. That wouldn't otherwise be included under our inclusionary requirements as they're currently written. So making it a more uniform requirement seemed a logical step because, of course, under state density bonus law, any inclusionary units that are provided could count if the developer wanted a density bonus. But we've had inclusionary projects built that were subject to the inclusionary requirements that did not receive a density bonus, like one single unit. So, anyways, so that's one other proposal is we're recommending reducing that requirement down to 5. And of course that would then open up the door to smaller projects potentially getting, for the community to get a benefit out of a smaller project, which we might see more frequently. Okay. The third component of our update to these requirements for sale housing. So at prior discussions, we kind of the consensus we got from the commission was the existing sliding scale requirement didn't make a ton of sense for sale housing either. So we are proposing, again, making it a straight percentage for sale developments. And we're proposing a kind of tiered approach. So for smaller projects, 5 to 10 dwelling units or lots, we're proposing a requirement of 15% of the units or lots affordable to moderate income households. So smaller projects, focusing on moderate income households. I think there's an economy of scale kind of reasoning there for a smaller project where the return to the developer might be a little bit less. Having those units that are affordable to higher earning but still below market rate households seem to align a little bit better. And then
Could I stop you there?
Yeah.
Just for the point of reference, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the median income for San Mateo County 125,000? Somewhere close to that.
Well, for a family of 4, it is 104 now, right? Yeah, we can verify that. We can pull it up.
Just to give us a scale, so.
I can tell you right now, for a household of 1, median income is 82,900. But off the top of my head, I can't say what their size is. Yes.
On a more practical level, I think that the chair and I lost our video feeds.
Oh. Okay.
Video cable.
It says check video cable. I'll just listen better.
Is what you're going over in this draft that we received? So we could probably follow along in that.
I'm just kind of pulling out.
Right, okay, okay, okay. We're all right.
You can look on over here if you want also. Move over a little bit.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah. Since this is a break, can I just ask really quickly? 15% of 5, I mean, this is kind of what I think John was talking about. I mean, 15% of 5 is 0.75. So
You're
just
rounding
round
up.
Okay.
Yeah. So any fractional unit over about 0.5 or more is 1 unit.
Got it.
Can I ask an odd question? Because I was pulling up this table just because I looked at it before, and I remember looking at 2 sets of percentage groups. So like I'm looking at Town of Colma and like Half Moon Bay, for example. Like they have 20% like for a percentage of total units, right? As I'm seeing in this table here. But then they have this breakdown of on-site income and unit requirements, and that's where that's like a little bit more nuanced because they've got this breakdown of Half Moon Bay is like basically a third, and it's 50% AMI, 80% AMI, and 100%, 20% AMI. And I'm just trying to understand. That's like I'm trying to understand how that relates to that 20%.
Sure.
If it's like if you're building 5 units, okay, so one of the units is going to a lower income group. So how does that additional categorization reflect into that number?
That's a great question for Half Moon Bay staff. I'd love to know how they implement
Because
it.
I was wondering
I mean,
if we were trying to do
for-
something like that, like
Right. If
like-
your requirement is only 2 units and then you have
right, how the heck
right.
do you even achieve
Yeah.
that? Right.
I'm sure that as great as my table skills are, that I may have not included whatever reasoning they have behind for a
seemed-
smaller
It
project.
just seemed incredibly complicated.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But let's assume that your requirement's 3 units and one of them has to be whatever, 50%. But I'm sure they have a method or a different way of measuring it for a smaller project.
Okay. So, just to close my thought, then I guess we're not looking at that sort of additional categorizing.
Well, okay, so let's do the math then. For a 5 unit, 15%.
unit.
I don't know if you guys
15%
caught that
points
in
up.
the table
I did.
too. It was
It
like
was,
a
yes.
confusing element for me,
Yeah.
and I just figured
Yep, that's a great point. Isn't this great? We're having a study session.
I mean, if you add it all up together, it's like 100%.
So,
Right, that's-
well,
yeah,
for
that's kind of what that's
I
kind of where I
think-
was going.
Oh, we
but-
did this math. So, for a five unit project, which would be subject to the 15%, it's a 0.75 requirement, which rounds up to 1. So one unit has to be moderate. And then for a larger project, let's say at 11 units, the smallest large project, 10% would have to be moderate and 5% would be low. Oops. Yeah, so 5%, it's one each, yeah. So 5% of 11 is 0.55, so you round that up to 1 unit. And then, of course, 10% is 1. So that's 2 units out of the 11 would need to be affordable. So yeah, we did do the math. I do remember doing the math because yeah, we didn't want to end up in a weird situation where we had too many requirements and not enough units.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, and that illustrates again for larger projects. We did think that it would merit having a broader range in the affordability levels. But homeownership in general, especially today, it is a lot more cost intensive. I mean, the down payment requirements, I mean, even if it is a below market rate unit, it is still a really significant financial burden on a household, or there's a higher threshold versus a rental project. So that's why for sale, we're focusing, like I said, on the moderate and then some low income households, just because to kind of recognize that there is such a financial barrier, even with assistance or even with reduced sales prices. There's just a bigger burden for homeownership versus rental housing. So that's why the rental is kind of geared, or what we're proposing is geared towards that kind of lower affordability segment, because that's, where it could be argued it's a much deeper need, higher threshold for sale. Okay, any other thoughts immediately coming to mind?
I'm just going to jump in here. A couple things just to underscore what you're saying. Recently, Habitat for Humanity said they couldn't build whatever they wanted to build in San Mateo County because the cost of labor and materials. So it kind of gives you a perspective when we talk about smaller units, what's involved. And looking at our RENA numbers and knowing that on very low income, we've had a deficit of, 144 units? And yet it's difficult because the city of Brisbane doesn't build the units. You have to have a developer coming in to do it. So I appreciate the recommendation here on the rental housing, trying to pick up the very low income households there, because typically those are renters in many cases. They don't want to buy, but they're being priced out. A lot of the housing built in the county, from what I've read, is still market rate, no matter what. So I think that this is really a good step in the right direction to start, even if we're using moderate income in for sale housing development and the percentages and the number of dwelling units. But it's bringing it more into the perspective of our city actually trying to take a step forward to address that when people want housing, they're not screaming for market rate housing. They're screaming for affordable. And this is spot on in trying to push that type of development. So I'm complimenting you. I think it's a very good idea the way you've crafted it.
I have a quick question. So by 2022, we'll need 114 more very low income units. So do you think, are we going to meet that target by that time, based upon what we're doing, and if we don't, what will we?
No, we won't meet that target
No.
Well, production, but zoning wise.
we've already met it.
We've met it zoning wise.
Oh, so we just have
With
to
the park
zone
side.
for it. Okay.
Yeah. And that's the kind of eternal difficulty with the regional housing needs allocation is, currently it has been a requirement for cities to adopt zoning to allow for private development of housing units. As we've heard, that might be changing, or is changing.
Yeah, the state is sort of changing their objectives and, you know, one would argue unfairly imposing the burden of actual production of housing on local government when we don't produce housing. That's the, you know, that's the market and the private sector that produces, you know, 98% of the housing. So it's an awkward sort of transition, and, you know, it's kind of a bumpy, the whole process and through the state and how that might be implemented is going to be kind of a bumpy ride for everybody over the next few years.
But for our current RENA, we have adopted zoning that under state law counts, you know, as being able to accommodate that income level of housing.
Is the trend you're seeing that they're requiring more lower income housing versus moderate income housing?
I think they're now the proportions are. I don't think there's a real strong trend that way. At least I haven't seen that over time. It's more a matter of production versus planning. Seems to be their change in emphasis, not adjusting between the categories.
Well, I mean, maybe you can go into contracting and start building too. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on these? It's okay, it's not your last chance. I can move on. Okay. We've kind of done that already. Okay, so second part. So we've talked about the inclusionary requirement itself. Now, of course, our mandate is to decide on an alternative. So the state law requires us to choose only one by right alternative. What you see before you in attachment 1 has proposed one by right alternative, that being payment of an in lieu fee. So meaning totally at the developer's discretion, they could elect to pay this fee. So we have already discussed the fact that we've had some economic work done, and if this is what we end up doing, we'll probably end up adopting the nexus fee that we already have kind of justified as our in lieu fee. The draft language also includes some additional alternatives that could be requested for City Council review and approval. These would be discretionary. City Council would be able to weigh the merits of the request, granted or not. That includes kind of that suite of options that we spent some time looking at a couple months ago. So offsite construction, land dedication, funding an affordable project in town, or any other combination of those or different alternatives a developer might propose. Now, I think we've also all discussed that some of these options may not be very likely to manifest. You know, we do not have a ton of land in our city that's just available and ready and waiting to be developed, for example. So maybe dedication of land isn't something that might occur, but it's also not totally impossible. So we've kind of left these in as, sure, it may not be likely to ever occur, but should there be an opportunity, and if the timing is right and the context works, they could make that request to council. So any immediate thoughts, reactions to that? Sounds great. Okay, and then we are not obligated by law to include an alternative to the inclusionary requirements for sale housing. So that was just for rental, what we just talked about. However, in taking this holistic look at our requirements, we did craft some suggestions for sale housing development alternative. And the one that seemed to maybe make the most sense for our city would be allowing a project to, instead of building separate units or lots, if it's a subdivision, to build the affordable units actually as accessory dwelling units. So I think in our city, especially the last year or so, we've seen a lot of interest in the community in building ADUs on their properties. It seems to be a way that has allowed for us to provide more housing at almost all the time very affordable or free cost without really impacting the perceived kind of feel of a neighborhood. So kind of piggybacking on that, if that option as we've drafted it was elected by the developer, they would have to restrict the rent of those units to a certain amount of, between 50 to 70% of AMI. They would be subject to all the development standards in the accessory dwelling unit chapter in our ordinance. So, any reactions to that?
Sounds good, but can you just give me an example of how that would work?
Sure. So, say someone came in proposing a 9-lot subdivision, single-family subdivision in the Brisbane acres. It's over 5 units, so our inclusionary requirements would apply, meaning that a percentage of those lots, I won't do the math right now, would have to be restricted. Thank you. 2 of those lots would have to be sold to families of lower moderate income. They could elect instead to build 2 ADUs. Rather than dedicate 2 out of their 9 lots, they could have their 9 lots that has ADU, right? Yeah. So it wouldn't. It would be an incentive, I guess, to have a kind of smaller scale development. I think for a developer trying to make a project pencil, it might be a preferable alternative.
I see. So they would sell the ADU and the structure
You-
of the building separately?
You can't sell an ADU separately from a dwelling, so it would be part of the. We have in our city also owner occupancy requirement. So whoever owns the property that the ADU is on has to either live in the house or in the ADU. So ADUs aren't sold separately; they are part of the title of the single-family dwelling.
So sorry, I'm slow. How would we make sure that that was going to a low income or moderate income family? So like the regular house, let's say it's a house, just because it's easier for me to visualize a house on a piece of property. There's an ADU that has to go to a lower income family, but the house is sold at a regular price, right? How do we make sure that the ADU is for a lower income?
Well, that would be deed restricted. It would show up on the title of that house, assuming it was built. And you wouldn't sell the lot. You'd be selling the house with the ADU. Those requirements that the city imposed would be showing up on the deed. So the buyer would be aware of that. It would be enforceable as any other kind of restriction.
And we would also, city staff would be monitoring. Well, I mean, we already monitor the handful of affordable units we have in town. So annual verification that the income levels are compliant. So for example, we get rent rolls from the Visitation Garden Senior Development every year. So we are confirming and reviewing, making sure that their affordability requirements are being complied with. So that would be a similar process. Leasing agreements, that sort of thing, those would all be things that the city would be able to monitor and make sure that they're compliant.
So, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So let's say someone buys the property with the ADU, could they put their family member there that met the
Mhm.
income? Okay.
Yeah.
Could they rent it out?
Yes, they would have to be rented.
Oh, the ADU would be rented.
Yes,
And it
that's
would
the
be
deed
to a
restriction.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Or they could let somebody, well, I guess that would be interesting with the family member issue. I think they don't have to charge anything at all, but whoever's living there would have to meet the income restriction.
Got it.
Yeah.
So they could rent it if they wanted to take income from it, but that rent would have to be based on the whatever
That's,
structure
would be
it is.
fixed on those numbers.
Got it.
And in the event someone doesn't rent the unit out, it would be caught. I'm just thinking of a scenario where someone doesn't rent it out, and the city would catch that during that kind of
Annual
annual
reporting.
evaluation process, and there would be so deed restricted. So it would somehow then reflect. There'd be some sort of penalty affixed to the property tax. Like through the county, or is this sort of some penalty? I know I'm getting into a
So
legal
yeah, it's a
area,
really
so-
good question. I don't know that we've fleshed out the details on
Okay,
how that would
and we
be
don't need to go. I was
done,
just
but-
kind of curious what the
Yeah. Yeah,
not
I mean, I
having
guess,
legal expertise in this area. What the
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess the maybe there's some assumption on the sort of the rationality of the buyer that if you have a rentable asset and you're basically buying that obligation, you're going to want to both have a not forfeit that economic return of renting it, even if it is a market restricted type unit. Why would you buy that unit that has an ADU if you're not interested in renting an ADU or managing that as part of your?
Yeah.
Because you have other sub lots theoretically within that same subdivision that don't have that obligation, or maybe even may not have an ADU at all.
I think one thing that could possibly come up with what you're saying is I would be suspicious about someone using it as an Airbnb rental.
Well, that's kind of where my mind.
Is that where you were
was
going? Okay.
Because
I thought
you know, there's some. Well, and just I'm aware that there are houses that have like additional units, whether legal or otherwise, where they're not occupied, right? I don't think in the current language there's no legal apparatus or ability for the city to intervene in those types of scenarios. Granted, in
Well, there is.
Oh, there is. Okay.
Well, presently, short-term rentals like Airbnb or VRBO are prohibited in residential districts.
Right.
So they're not allowed to operate at all. If the council, which they are taking this up again February 7th, if council adopts a regulatory program, it's already been made pretty clear, I think from what we've heard, that they would want to prohibit accessory dwelling units to be used for short-term rentals, that would not be permitted at all. If we allow short-term rentals in town, they want to make sure ADUs are reserved for long-term real housing units for residents versus these income kind of opportunities. I'm assuming that's the direction they would go in. So, the annual monitoring would be an opportunity for us to check in, make sure if we adopt a short-term rental program, I'm assuming there'll be some sort of monitoring there as well to make sure there aren't short-term rentals operating illegally or unpermitted in Brisbane.
Okay.
Is there, I mean, maybe you've already answered this, but is there a way that you can say, like, has to be occupied?
Yeah. I mean,
Is that something that we can do?
I'd argue it already is very, shall be rented to households. It doesn't say may be rented to households. It doesn't say shall be left vacant. I'd argue the language as written is gives the city the means or the ability to enforce that. But
and I think too, like, obviously we're brainstorming here. I think implementing a program like that, if that was an option that someone opted for, so someone would have to opt for this first of all. I would imagine we would have a very regimented and upfront program of making sure that buyers are fully aware, vetted, educated on all aspects if they are buying a house with a unit that's affordable, on what that really means, what their obligations are. There are examples of this in other cities that we might be able to look to as a template, some best practices. But I don't think the assumption is we would kind of, they would build it and then we'd wave and say, okay, like, good luck. I think it would be a very active and a relationship basically that we'd be building with that development. If it's a development that has an HOA, I mean, there's just a lot of venues for us being the city, or if we end up hiring consultants, if we have a lot of affordable units in the future, maybe we'll be hiring a specialized company that does this all the time versus city staff. So, yeah, if this is something that we went forward with, it would be, a fully kind of realized venture. It wouldn't be we hope that you comply.
I think the commission's raised a lot of very good
Yeah.
questions and issues that, will have to be fleshed out
Definitely.
through an implementation program. So thank you for those comments.
Okay, you want to talk about density bonus? Okay. So the housing element program that we're responding to, maybe I'll go back to it. It's HB 5A, and it obligates us to amend our ordinance to do one of many things. Either grant a proportionally lower density bonus and or incentives for projects that don't qualify under state density bonus law, or grant a density bonus or other incentives greater than required for projects that meet or exceed the state density bonus law qualifications. So it's basically just asking us to adopt some measures that kind of go above and beyond to really incentivize developers that are opting for the density bonus to get more of a community benefit or give more of a community benefit. So one solution we've proposed to you all is focusing on those smaller housing developments that don't meet the threshold of a 5-unit project under state density bonus law. So these would be 2 to 4 projects, 2 to 4 unit projects. So what we've put forward for you guys to look at is some, for these smaller projects, which we've also kind of gone through and thought about for each district where this actually would make sense. Because, of course, in the R1 district, this doesn't even apply. We're looking at really the R2, R3, and SCR1 districts, realistically. Our NCRO districts, NCR2 district doesn't have a density established at all, so there isn't really a situation to ask for a density bonus. So in those particular districts, our density requirements vary by size. So that's why in this proposal, we're kind of crafting it to fit certain sizes of lots in certain zoning districts where it actually could be taken advantage of. So these density bonus requirements, again, these are such small project sizes. It kind of looks like a big percentage. For example, for a project in the R2, if you're a lot that's between 4950 and 7499 square feet, we'd have a 50% requirement or 30% density bonus if you give us 50% affordability. So the percentages all basically work out to be like between an exchange of 1 unit for 1 unit, or in some cases 2 units for 2 or 2 units for 1. It was a little tricky to kind of right size that, so that's why we ended up, if we were going to move forward with this type of incentive, really base it off of specific districts and specific lot sizes.
And I'm guessing that you maybe did some napkin math on the actual lot, like the how many of those lots are currently in R2 and R3? Like you've
Well,
kind of done that rough math.
There's I'll tell you right now, I can't think of a single lot in the R2 that's standing alone is 4950.
Okay, because that
it
was
would
kind of my
be-
yeah. So that's where I was going.
Right,
was
right.
the-
I mean,
how
how often are we really going to see this?
Yeah.
But it is not impossible for someone to purchase a couple lots next to each other. I mean,
Right.
we're trying to of course meet the intent of our housing element program. We're trying to get creative.
Yeah. I get you.
Whether or not right now there exists a almost 5,000 square foot or 7,500 square foot lot in the R2, obviously is not.
Yeah, and again, I think things do change over time, and what doesn't make sense today economically or is practical might, things change over time, and
Got it.
then I think, a big part of this is to demonstrate that we are implementing our housing element to HCD. We have a program to.
And thinking creatively on ways that it
Yeah,
can be
exactly.
done. I get it. I was kind of digging a bit deeper if we've actually kind of. So it's more. It's like putting the framework like this. If these lots were to,
It's just
be
a bit
sold and
aspirational.
developed-
yes.
Yeah. I see.
But for the R3, on the other hand, I think that is more, I don't want to say likely, but yeah, more realistic.
It's possible. Yeah.
In the SCR1 for sure. because the lots in the SCR 1, which
Right.
is Southwest Bayshore,
Right.
are about 7,500 square feet,
Got it.
right? But there are some that are a little bit smaller. So yeah, maybe the R2 is a little more aspirational than real.
Can I jump in here? In answer to what you're saying, I live in an R3 district. There are a lot of unusual lot sizes. There are sometimes two small homes next to each other. Someone could feasibly buy both lots, ask for them to be merged and put a structure. And at least what I've seen in the past 5-10 years, there's, in terms of new housing that would fall under this, there's been a lot of duplexes and triplexes, not many fourplexes. So this really is feasible.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, the second part of the update. So, in addition to putting out a olive branch of sorts to smaller projects, we are also proposing meeting the second kind of tier of obligations in our housing element program, which would be to further incentivize projects that are kind of going above and beyond. And incentivizing literally meaning allowing a developer to request an additional incentive or concession, as those specific terms are defined in the state code, if they provide more either affordability or a higher percentage of, depending on the project. If it's a senior project, for example, like, if I have the excerpt, yeah. So the way the state code is structured right now, it breaks down, first of all, no project can receive more than 3 incentives or concessions. So the most amount of incentives or concessions are allotted to projects that include at least 30% of the units for lower income households, or at least 15% for very low income households, or at least 30% for persons and families of moderate income if it's a condo development. So that's the ceiling in the state law. So we are putting that ceiling up by, you can request one additional incentive or concession if you go above and beyond those minimum requirements. So go back to the language there. And that just, again, seemed, with the intent of meeting the direction of our housing element program, seemed the most logical step, I suppose, for if we're obligated to give additional incentives, then we would do so for a project that exceeded those minimum requirements.
Are you done? Do we have any comments? Commissioner Gooding, you look like, no? Commissioner Patel?
Sorry, is this something that's required? Or is this just like, I'm sorry, I was
That's okay.
calculating what 2.5 per acre was when you were
Sure.
sort of,
So
I didn't know what an acre
That's
was
okay.
and how many square feet that is.
I'm shocked. So I put up the program language here. So yeah, our program does say amend the ordinance to permit the city to grant a proportionally lower density bonus and or incentives for affordable housing projects that don't qualify for a variety of reasons for a state density bonus. And, or as well as, so yes, we are committed to do something when it comes to opening the door to density bonus projects that wouldn't otherwise qualify under state law, which is why we're proposing that small project density bonus, and also give some additional incentives to projects. So yes, that's part of our.
The additional incentive is required as well, or is it just like this?
Says as well as.
Yeah, that's under our housing element. That was not a state requirement. That was a policy that the council approved as part of adoption of the last housing element.
Got it.
Commissioner Sison? Commissioner Gomez, you look like you're thinking.
Just thinking, not, don't have anything formulated yet.
Okay.
Some of this stuff, I mean, it just seems like, I mean, when you have like 35,000 square foot lots on average, and like no land, it doesn't really matter, right?
Well, I would never say that it doesn't matter, but I think we look at the type of projects that we always see. We've talked about this before. They're smaller. Even with lowering our inclusionary requirement to 5, it wouldn't, you know.
Is there anything that says that I know that there's laws now that say that anyone can have an ADU, pretty much, right? But is there any requirement that they be like occupied by low-income people, like or moderately
We
persons?
we
rent
could
it?
have income restrictions for ADUs. Other cities do, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've,
don't.
I think historically, it's been a market, I mean, whether it's happenstance or market, I mean, the surveys that have been done in Brisbane historically, they were being rented at, sort of below
Free,
market.
usually.
Below market rate,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
they're sort of practically below market without being mandated. But certainly that's something the city could do. We have the ability to income restrict on ADUs.
Yes.
But, I mean, would that also then, I'm just asking, would that qualify then as units that we are making either low
Yep.
or moderate income?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
that
We
help us?
do account for the accessory dwelling units that are constructed in town even without any sort of deed restriction. We are allowed, because of our annual surveys, to count those as, I think we say moderate.
Moderate.
Yeah.
Yeah, we take credit for those
We definitely do.
now. Yeah, take credit for anything we can possibly take credit for.
I think you're making an excellent suggestion there, and maybe that's something that we could pass on. I don't know how you would include that in this draft or where you would insert that language, but if it was restricted to low and very low income, or even moderate, any of those would help. Because with continuing tightening of the housing rental market, it seems like the ADUs are gonna end up also eventually getting into market rate.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's,
So I think that's really a great suggestion you made.
And it helps in construction. I mean, if we have a construction requirement, it's like, well,
Commissioner Gomez, did you come up?
No,
Oh, okay.
that's a good point. I'm gonna withhold my comments at this point. We're making an effort to have a really strong and well thought out policy with the intention that this is going to stimulate some more activity in the marketplace. And I think there's question marks around that, and I think we've got to put it out there and see what happens, right? I think we can kind of go down all these different rabbit holes, and I don't know if that's the best use of our time. So that's why I'm going to just withhold more comments
Okay.
until I have something very concrete.
I feel I've been taking your share of comments today, so.
It's okay. Yeah, great. You've had great suggestions thus far.
I'm a little curious on, are we monitoring these ADUs that are being constructed? Like, let's say someone builds one and decides to use it for an art studio or an office. Like, how do we know, it's being occupied?
We do have, so that we send out a survey every year to everyone that we know has a legal ADU. And the first question is it rented? And we do get a few every year that say, no, we're not renting it. So, and that could be for whatever reason. They're using it as a studio or an office or whatever. But the majority that we're seeing are rented, or are occupied by someone and just not charging rent.
And so how do you identify who has the ADUs? Is that reporting mandated or is that voluntary? And,
Well, we issue the permits.
okay, so you are permitting and
Well, again, the units that we know of,
that
the
you
ones
know
we've
of, right,
permitted,
right.
those are what we have ownership
Right.
information.
And then when you solicit the information from them as a follow-up, is the reporting back mandatory? Is it
No.
expressed as you must respond to this?
It's not mandatory. We try to be really nice. We make it as anonymous too, so people don't have to worry about, they can be as honest with us as possible. Yeah. But no, we've never really required it. I don't know how we would, unless that was something we built into our accessory dwelling unit permit agreement, that it is mandatory that they.
Well, certainly if we went down this route about an affordability component, we would have to sort of ratchet up that level of sort of monitoring and compliance.
I would imagine it have to be
Into an agreement.
agreement.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not, again, it's not undoable. And I don't remember, Julia, maybe you do, in terms of last time you did one of these surveys, what kind of response rate did you get?
75%.
It's not bad.
Pretty
That's
good.
not bad. Yeah, like 100.
Because we had at least one project this past year that had an ADU included as a component.
Oh, well, that you've seen maybe, but
Right.
what building permits for single-family dwellings, they don't require review by the commission. We process quite a few
Right,
of them
that's
actually,
true.
and I think almost every single new home proposal I've seen the past 2 or 3 years has had an accessory dwelling unit
Really?
since we've
That's
kind of opened up
significant.
those. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, it's
Right.
new, it's going to be expensive, it's going to have an expensive mortgage. I think it's really seen as an incentive to whoever's buying it to have some sort of income potential to help subsidize the $1 million home they just purchased.
Okay.
Or if it's, a family multi-generational, we've seen that too, where people building and occupying the homes want an accessory dwelling unit so their parents can live there. So yeah, seems to be definitely a trend.
So are we all satisfied that we've given sufficient input to staff on the draft language? Yes?
Yes.
Yes? Everyone? Yes?
I think ideally we'd like to move this on to the public hearing stage if possible. We didn't show you every change we've made since our meetings to the ordinance, but we have drafted a lot more of a cohesive update to that, and we kind of talked about that as a group, that we just wanted to kind of tighten everything up, reduce redundant kind of replication of state law where we can. So if you're feeling comfortable, we would then, our next steps would be to move forward with a public hearing in the next month, I think, late February.
Were you guys just going to brainstorm some of that ADU stuff and then just add it, and then we can just do that all at one time?
We would probably take that as a side item. I mean, I think, because it's not really, this particular ordinance amendment wouldn't address this. And I think what we do is we introduce that as another item, that if you want to make that recommendation, you'd be recommending to the council that they adopt this ordinance, however you modify it or approve it, and then request the council initiate another amendment to the ADU standards, because that's where it's going to be embedded in actually ADU. It's somewhere else in the ordinance. So we don't have right now that authorization to proceed. There's no housing element language for that, where there's no direction from the council, but you can certainly request the council to initiate that.
Again, I want to commend you. I know that what we look at as a final, here's your draft language, represents many, many hours and a lot of research and thought. And I think it's really a step in the right direction. So thank you for compiling that.
It's fun.
We'll ask you some other time if it's still fun. Okay. So you don't anticipate any more workshops on this topic before a public hearing?
Absent any remaining items, if anything we drafted seemed unreasonable. Of course, once we go to public hearing and you're looking at the whole cohesive update, I'm sure there will be more discussion promulgated from that. I don't think we expect you guys to do this in one public hearing. Yeah, we wouldn't object, but I think once you see everything all together, that'll probably generate some more discussion. But unless there's overwhelming need for it.
Okay. And so we'll move on to items initiated by staff, and I have a question for staff on that, if I may. Previous incarnations of the Planning Commission dealt with the topic of short-term rentals, and I noted at the last council meeting that was something that they've taken on. Do you anticipate then that that will not come back to planning, that it will be resolved at the council level?
I expect that the council will provide policy direction and that they will they'll remand it back to the planning commission for the actual final ordinance. Because there's no ordinance for the
Right.
council to consider. It's that what happened before, and it might have been before even your time, Madam Chair,
I attended those,
Okay.
were public hearing.
was that it was a really good discussion and there's a lot of balance on, pro and con, and the commission basically threw up their hands at that point. They just didn't make a recommendation to the council. They said, put it to a vote of the people, and that's not what the council, so the council sent it to one of their subcommittees, and they've been sort of discussing this at a policy level on and off for probably 18 months and trying to wrap it up. And so if they get policy sort of concurrence, then they'll direct us and you essentially what they want to see in this final version of the ordinance. That would be subject to public hearing, obviously, and so I expect you'll see the final iteration.
Okay. So I circumvented, do you have any other?
Just two things. One is last week at council, they received a letter from Universal Paragon, basically UPC indicating that they were planning on modifying their specific plan in compliance with Measure JJ, which is no surprise. So the council acknowledged receipt of that letter and sort of talk through the council some of the next steps, which would be, from the city's standpoint, probably a community engagement process through Home for All, which would be happening in the spring of this year. It hasn't really been formulated yet, but we would probably, and we haven't really talked about this a lot, but I suspect that would be a community sort of event or community events, not in this room, not as a hearing body in front of the planning commission or the city council, a much more informal setting. And what other cities who have used Home for All in sort of discussing these issues, housing issues over, there are about 4 cities who did it last year. They would often have both planning commissioners and city councils members as individuals observe these community meetings, but not actively participate in them. Because again, you have a different role in any kind of decision making. So anyway, that's something that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it would be useful for you as, in future deliberations on the Baylands, if again, whatever community input that supports that you've heard it firsthand. I think that'd be very valuable. But there'll be more information on that as we roll it out. And then the other item is we are scheduling a study session. Well, not really a study session, I guess an informational workshop, but we'll have it in this room because it seems to be the way the commission wants to have them, regarding some other aspects of state housing law, the Housing Accountability Act and SB 35, which were passed a couple of years ago, actually. And the ripple in the pond, it does have some impacts on our current zoning regulations that we're going to need to modify, and we kind of just want to give you some background on that for the next meeting as well.
And again, are you saying that would be at our next meeting or
Yes.
upcoming meeting? Okay,
Next
so another workshop.
Mhm.
All right. Items initiated by the commission, anyone?
No.
So I'm just going to bring something up. I also saw with interest the council has a subcommittee, and I don't, forgive me if I get the wrong name, it's Infrastructure Utilities, some such name. And they were discussing future water needs in Brisbane, including codes and regulations, and we talked about a subcommittee having to do with wastewater, capturing water, and we requested staff discuss with Public Works. So it sounds like there are many things going on. It was, to me, really encouraging that council subcommittee is going in that direction as well.
Yeah, and I think what I haven't had the time really to sort of chase this all down. I think we need to kind of, I know you had a particular issue and a project that kind of stimulated a discussion on one particular aspect of the bigger issue. I'm trying to capture the bigger issue, we bring it back informationally just so we all understand what the options and what's going on that's outside of this commission's purview and staff's purview, and sort of see if there are agendas that you can advance, policies that you can advance in that context of what's happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes sense. All right. I'll take a motion for adjournment. Our next meeting is Thursday, February 14, 2019 at 7:30 p.m. Do I hear a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you and good night.
Aye.
Thank you.